How's going guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto was the blood breather and got harem with Moka? Part 2. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. So, we have to join your newspaper club now? Naruto asked, resting a hand in his palm. He and the gang had been held behind after class by their feline teacher, Nekonim Shizuka, a few days after Sai and Minami's arrival at Youkai Academy. Shizuka nodded eagerly, a bright smile adorning her youthful features. That's right. You guys missed out on the club fair the other day, so you didn't get to pick a club to join. And since if the newspaper club doesn't get more members this year, it'll get shut down, I thought you'd all be happy to help out. Ah yes, the club fair. He'd been reluctant to miss that one out, but his opinion didn't matter all that much. The Nine Tails chakra mode was a real energy drainer, and he'd been left paralyzed for the whole day. Sure, the effects had been nice enough to wait a day before they finally caught up with him, but it wasn't exactly fun to be unable to move for a full 24-hour period. Still, having Kurumu and Moka dress up as nurses and wait at his bedside, rushing to get anything he required, hadn't been all that unpleasant. Not that he'd ever let them know that. Happy isn't really the word I'd use to describe how I'm feeling, but it doesn't look like I've got a choice. When's the first meeting? Right now. You can come in, Morioka-kun. The classroom door slid open. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he saw the arrogant smirk that just bared one canine, poking out against his bottom lip, the half-lidded chocolate brown eyes that flashed in excitement as they passed over the bodies of his female companions. And the hand that rose to brush through his unruly mop of dark hair in an altogether dramatic gesture. There was something he couldn't help but find familiar about him, but he couldn't put a finger on it. How would he know any of the upperclassmen, let alone this one who smelled so much of wet dog it was almost unbearable? This is Morioka Jin, the sole member of the newspaper. Well, not anymore, right? Anyways, he's the only one who's left after all the other members left last year. Please, Nekonim-sensei, call me Jin. He flashed a dazzling smile in the teacher's direction, but his eyes stayed on Naruto. They narrowed, even as his smile grew, but it wasn't a dangerous glare. It was almost challenging, in a way. Like he was daring him to say something in his presence. Naruto's own eyes flashed crimson as the name struck something in him. His dream. Now he understood the overpowering odor that radiated from the man before him. Morioka Jin was a werewolf, a hybrid creature with the ability to transform into a bestial creature caught between man and animal. Contrary to the countless folk stories that graced the chapters of the world's history, they could transform on any night, but their powers were greatest on a full moon. I'm the club president, so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Oh no, the faculty meeting's about to start. I'd better run, so I'll leave it all to you, Morioka-kun. With that, Shizuka hurried out the door and Jin leant on the teacher's desk as he eyed the six before him skeptically. So, I guess I'd better explain what the newspaper club's all about, huh? We're responsible for writing, editing and publishing the school newspaper. If anything happens on campus, we're there to report it. Members of the newspaper club have to be prepared to do anything for a story including putting themselves in harm's way, so I warn you now. This club is not for the faint of heart. Jin exclaimed, pumping his fist in the air. Sai, who had taken a position where he leant over his desk with his head rested on both hands that made him look very interested in what the canine sophomore had to say, gave a soft hum of appreciation. Well, he's certainly enthusiastic, he joked, smiling softly. Guess he's one of those real hard-hitting reporters I've heard about. But that said though, there isn't breaking news all the time, so sometimes we have to report on the normal stuff too. Despite that, do any of you have any story ideas? How about that peeping Tom? Kurumu asked, earning strange looks from the three males. You mean you haven't heard? There's a pervert going round the school, peeping on girls left, right and center. Problem is, he's so fast no one can catch him. So, why don't we use the newspaper to catch him? She received approvals from Moka, Yukari and Minami, and a quiet nod from Jin. Sounds good. First things first, if we're gonna catch anyone we need some information, which means we need informants. And get those, we do the same thing every other great reporter does. We hit the streets and start asking questions. Someone has to have some intel somewhere. A few minutes later, and the group was hot on the task of putting up posters, hand-drawn by the club themselves, around the school. You see, the general public is a newspaper's greatest resource. As long as people are willing to come forth, a paper can keep going, Jin said seriously to Sai, who nodded lazily. A few feet away stood two wooden stools, atop which Moka, Kurumu and Minami were perched precariously as they tried to pin posters far too high up the wall for anyone to be able to read them. Jin-san? Minami asked as she stretched her arms to their limit, trying to pin the A2 sheet of paper in her hands to the plastered wall. The stammer in her voice had vanished with Naruto out of earshot, of course. Are you sure the posters are supposed to be up this high? Jin looked up and smirked. No, I think they need to be a little higher than that. Higher? Are you kidding me? My arms can't go much further. No pain, no gain, girls. I can help put posters up too, Jin-san desu. Yukari chirped happily, only to receive a gently smile from the club president. Sorry, but you need to be a little bigger for this job, kid. Maybe when you're older. He patted her head, smiling brightly, only for Yukari to pout dejectedly. She ran off down the hall, Sai chasing after her, leaving Jin and the three girls alone. He grinned as he squatted down, his eyes traveling upwards. A low chuckle escaped his throat, but quiet enough for the girls to remain unaware of just what he was doing. Heh. Having fun? He almost lost his balance when the question sounded rather loudly in his ear. Naruto hadn't even been anywhere near him a moment ago, yet suddenly was beside him, squatting in the same position with a rather casual look on his face as he stared unflinchingly at the upperclassman beside him. Jin stood up suddenly, staring at the blonde with wide eyes as he rose to his full height, dusting himself off. What do you mean? Oh, don't play dumb. It doesn't suit you. Just fess up and we can all go back to work. Naruto gave Jin a hard glare, cracking his knuckles intimidatingly. You were looking up their skirts, weren't you? Jin smiled. He could use this to his advantage after all. He swept a hand through his hair as he bared his teeth in a charming smile, his eyes beginning to shine in the same way they had in his introduction. Now, do you really think I'd ever do a thing like that? I'm far above such a dirty deed. What's going on? Moka asked, turning from the wall as she began to overhear their conversation. Oh, nothing, Jin replied, smiling brightly at the vampire. Your friend here just said that he saw your panties. Moka and Kurumu both grew a small, though bright, blush, while Minami's face steadily turned from normal to scarlet over the course of several seconds. She toppled off her stool and fell to the floor with a dull thud as she fainted in a fashion Naruto found very familiar, holding the hem of her skirt as if it were her last lifeline. You Uzumaki don't know my PP panties, she mumbled as Moka and Kurumu knelt at her sides. I think you killed her, Kurumu deadpanned, testing her forehead with the back of her hand. But besides that, how could you just pick up my skirt like that, Naruto-kun? You could at least ask. Moka didn't say anything. Her head was lowered in such a way that overshadowed her eyes, even as she and the brunette lifted the Jinchuriki from her resting place and carried her down the hall toward the nurse's office. You're pretty dumb, you know that. If you'd just kept your mouth shut, at least club activities could have carried on. Hey, do you know if Moka-san and Naruto-san are dating? Someone told me she was kissing him on the neck. Seems pretty obvious to me. For real? She seems so shy though. You're kidding me, him? Jin mused, brushing back his hair in frustration. The dusky brown lock swept clear of his deep scowl as his mind raced. He held no claim over the much-desired Akashiya Moka, this was true, but he still felt betrayed somehow. He believed that, despite his wandering eyes, Moka was meant for him. Yet now, he couldn't so much as think of the rosy-haired beauty without that irritating blonde nuisance by her side. His long fingers curled into a fist and clenched so hard his nails dug into the flesh of his palm and drew coppery lifeblood, the same that Moka so adored. I won't let you win, Uzumaki Naruto. Hey, who was that? He was gone. No indication of his presence remained, just the rustle of leaves as he made his escape into the brush. The changing room window burst open, one of the two girls leaning out as she scanned the bushes with a frown. As if by some stroke of misfortune, the very person that Jin silently fumed at had strolled past. What the hell do I think you're doing? And in broad daylight, too. As if it would have been better at night. Naruto yelled, oblivious to the slitted canine eyes that watched him with a baleful glare. A low growl tore from the werewolf's throat as he watched the blonde argue fruitlessly with a half-dressed first year through the open window. He had to separate Naruto from Moka somehow, or there was no way he could show Moka how he cared for her. After all, he'd heard of Naruto's combat prowess. It was widely known throughout the school, and even in his transformed state, he may have some trouble dealing with a little blonde nuisance. A grin tugged at his cheeks as the cogs of his mind turned, and he was away, ready to make his plan a reality. Ah! Naruto exclaimed as he finally managed to escape the reprimanding stares that had been leveled on him and only him for the past 20 minutes through Moka and Kurumu's impromptu interrogation. The two had dragged him from his shouting match with a still semi-dressed first year to an unused classroom, dumping him at a desk at the front of the room and staring at him, arms crossed over their chests, until he decided to talk. He had tried to tell them it was simply a misunderstanding, he'd just been passing by, but if they were listening they made no effort to show it. He slumped against the wall, sighing tiredly as he hung his head in defeat. Something on your mind, Uzumaki? His eyes slid to the side and met with the cheerful grin of his senpai as the wolfish teen stepped up to him. You look a little down, I gotta say. Naruto sighed again, running a hand through the mess of unruly golden hair. It doesn't even matter. What do I want? Now, that's not very friendly. I'm only trying to be a good senpai, after all. What kind of a guy would I be if I didn't look out for my cowhide? He stroked his chin and thought for a moment. Something to do with Moka-san, ain't it? No, don't tell me. I can tell by the look on your face. And I've got just the solution for your problem. Naruto arched an eyebrow as Jin grabbed him by the arm and pulled him out of the school building to what appeared to be the back of the school, if the jumbled assortment of boxes and barrels were any indication. He pointed to an open window, probably about 2 meters above the ground, and smiled. See that window? Go look into it. You can stand on the barrel to get up. Naruto stared at Jin incredulously. Did he really think that he was that dumb? I don't know, senpai. A mischievous smirk tugged at his whiskered cheeks, one that sent an uncomfortable shiver down Jin's spine. That barrel looks kinda unsteady, don't you think? Why don't you test it out for me? If it can hold your weight, it can definitely hold mine. Jin cursed under his breath. He was supposed to be an idiot. Hey now, I'm not the one trying to get back into Moka-san's good graces. Just take a peek through the window and all your problems'll be gone. He smiled charmingly, only for his charms to fade almost instantly when Naruto shook his head with a quiet laugh. You must think I'm a complete dimwit, huh? Well, Jin said, only to step quickly to the side to dodge a swift punch from the blonde, scowling at the fist as it passed by his face with a rush of wind. Whoa now, what's with all the hostility? Trust me, Morioka. I'm nowhere near as stupid as some people think. Trying to frame me again, were ya? Jin glanced to the side and smirked. I don't need to try, Uzumaki. You can frame yourself pretty well, after all. You're really not as smart as you say. Naruto donned a confused look as Jin gestured to the still open window. His eyes grew wide as a shrill cry echoed from within. Who's there? Naruto cursed under his breath. Of course, it would be the girls' changing room. How many of these things were there around this school? Jin turned away from the blonde, smiling mischievously. Have fun, Uzumaki-kun. Try not to die. Morioka seemed to vanish into thin air with a carefree wave as Naruto ducked to dodge a flying hairspray can. Naruto cursed under his breath. He should have expected such a vanishing act from a werewolf, said to be one of the fastest of monsters. Still, he was a shinobi. In a flash of yellow, he was gone as the girls he'd peeped on crowded around his former location with confused expressions. An awkward silence filled the newspaper club's headquarters. In truth, an unused classroom on the 3rd floor of the school building. Yukari drummed her fingers on the small wooden table, glaring quietly at the busty succubus stood by the window. In her eyes, it was her fault Naruto-kun wasn't here. He'd obviously gone out to try and set things right between him, Kurumu and Moka-san, and since the vampire could do no wrong in her eyes, the one she dubbed cow tits was the sole option for his absence. She looked up sharply as Kurumu's sharp cry cut through the uneasy peace, leaping away from the window as if bitten. Naruto-kun. What are you doing here? As if he'd sensed the young witch's thoughts, Naruto appeared, crouched on the windowsill with a serious look that only served to make him look more ruggedly handsome. However, in spite of the short time she'd known the blonde, she realized that it took a lot to get his smile to fade. If he looked half as serious as he did now, something must be very wrong. He dropped onto the floor and rose to his full, impressive height, though compared to her, it wasn't saying much, and let out a short sigh, rubbing his brow with a tiredness that seemed unusual on someone so young. I thought you were with Jin-san. Naruto's eyes hardened, and Yukari blushed a little. Did he tell you that? Have you seen him? Kurumu gaped for a moment under the barrage of questions. Kurumu, I need you to tell me. It's urgent. He sighed again and redoubled his efforts with an imploring look that had both girls barely holding back a girlish squeal. So damned hot. Please. Kurumu's brow furrowed as she tried her hardest to remember. He stopped by for a moment earlier, said that the two of you would be out for a little while and that we should start the meeting without you. But then Moka didn't show and actually, he asked about her too. Wondered where she was. Naruto's eyes narrowed into slits and his hands clenched into fists. Naruto-kun. He didn't answer, at least no straight away. He moved to the door, growling softly, motioning to the two as he left. Come with me, both of you. We're going to blow this peeping Tom story wide open. This isn't very smart of you. Moka ignored the deep, snide tones of her inner self, echoing in her ears from within the silver rosary upon her chest. She brushed a strand of bubblegum pink behind her ear as the soft breeze tugged at her, causing her silhouette to blur and shift as it stood heavy and dark against the light of the blood-red moon. She barely reacted when she heard the door to the stairwell swing open on creaky hinges and heavy footfalls echoed across the rooftop in the dead of night. Her mind rested solely, of course, on Naruto. She couldn't ignore that tiny feeling that something didn't add up. After all, why would he even bother peeking at her underwear when they'd been together, in bed, practically naked only a few days prior? Something wrong, Moka-san. It's already nightfall. Her skin rose in goosebumps as the warm, charming, sweet as honey tones washed over her, and she looked over her shoulder. There he stood, suave smile plastered on his tanned skin, eyes narrowed in such a way that it almost dared her to come closer so she could see more of them. Gin-senpai. I tried to warn you. I heard about Naruto. He's not the type, I know, but you can't judge a book by its cover. Moka looked to the ground. Even so, I still don't want to believe it. Jin sighed and stepped beside her, casting a glance at the grounds over the wooden balcony before fixing his captivating gaze upon the rosette. Moka-san, you should just forget about Naruto. He's nothing but a pervert, after all. He snaked an arm around her shoulders and pulled her close to his side. Moka's eyes widened and she let out a small cry. Let me comfort you tonight. His arm dropped to rest on the curve of her waist and he tried to lean forward, but Moka bent away with a dissatisfied groan. Neither of them heard the door swing open a third time and a set of near-silent footsteps make their way across the roof. You're awfully quick to write me off, Jin-senpai. The second year stopped and his grip around Moka's waist loosened for just a moment, but long enough for her to slip away and glide gracefully away. Jin leveled an irritated stare upon the blonde, who leant nonchalantly against the balcony on the other side, Kurumu and Yukari at his side, as he smirked triumphantly. He growled quietly. Damn him. How dare he look so smug. You're awfully quick in general, Naruto-kun. Just how'd you get out of that situation, anyway? You aren't the only one who's fast. Now, how's about we end this game and you come clean? I'm craving ramen right about now. His head jerked to the side as Jin's fist suddenly appeared in the empty space and he glared at the offending limb, though his carefree posture remained as was. There's no point hiding anymore, huh? You were supposed to be a good little idiot and take the fall, but you're just too annoying to lay down and take a beating, aren't you? Naruto shrugged and gently pushed Jin's outstretched arm away from him. I had enough of that when I was a kid, man. Now, I'm simply too awesome. His fist became a blur as it flashed from the confines of his pocket and buried itself in Jin's midriff. A strangled choking sound escaped the sophomore's throat as he gasped, air forcibly expelled from his lungs by the sudden and unbearable pressure on his abdomen. Naruto's hand twisted in his gut and his fingers splayed out so that his flat palm rested on the elder's stomach before Jin hurtled backwards through the air with a burst of chakra as Naruto utilized one of the Hyuga techniques Neji had given to him. Gotta say, out of all the jutsu Neji showed me, my favorite has to be the empty palm. It's just so fun to watch your enemies fly helplessly away from you. Jin crashed into the ground just before the wooden balcony and slowly rose to his feet. Little bastard, who the hell do you think you are? Jin's muscles rippled under his shirt, his eyes glowing red as the moon. His skin bled a charcoal gray and grew a thick dark fur as his limbs grew and twisted, forcing his countenance into the air as he hulked over them all, laughing a deep roaring howl as he threw out his arms. Look. Look upon my true form and know just how useless you are. I am a werewolf. Oh. He punctuated his declaration with a long howl at the moon and was gone. No sound, no leaves, not even a cloud of dust kicked up by the sudden movement. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist. Naruto jerked back as he felt something collide with his stomach, and while it didn't pack enough force to force him off his feet, it still forced him to double over as he dry retched from the sudden winding. What the he managed through the coughs, his eyes scanning the rooftop for any sign of the werewolf. He shouldn't be able to hide with such a large body, yet the canine youkai had managed to vanish seemingly off the face of the earth. He felt the rush of wind to his left and instinctively raised an arm to block. A grin tugged at his cheeks as he felt Jin's attack rebound harmlessly off of his guard, only for his smile to fade as another strike found his other side and forced him from his feet. Damn. You get it now, Uzumaki. Werewolves are the fastest of all youkai. I bet you can't even follow my movements, can you? Naruto grunted in response, pushing himself up. Jin was right, his movements were too fast to see with the naked eye, so even though he was likely stronger physically than the second year, it was useless if he couldn't keep up. The Rinnegan's spatial manipulation techniques could perhaps slow the lycanthrope if he were to keep his feet away from the floor, but that would mean entering the Nine Tails chakra mode, which wasn't an appealing option. Just as vampires are creatures which rely upon power, werewolves rely upon speed. That speed increases with the brightness of the moon's light, and on a night like tonight, when the full moon is at its brightest, a werewolf become undefeatable. Naruto scoffed. This guy never shut up. That was when it hit him, the one way he could be faster than this furry freak, no matter how bright the moon was. He rose to his feet, one hand shoved deep into his pocket as he worked with a complex seal in the base. Don't count your eggs before they hatch, Jin-senpai. There's always someone better, faster, or stronger than you out there, but that's what makes it fun. Knowing that there's that one person who can beat you, that you have to work harder to defeat just so you can truly have the right to say I am the strongest. And that person, for you. His hand emerged from his pocket, twirling on his index finger a kunai, its 3 sharpened tips glinting in the crimson moonlight and revealing the black ink inscribed upon their surfaces as the 3-pronged blade spun with a soft whirring sound. Is me. You gonna try and stab me, a little brat? You think you can keep up with me long enough to get a good hit? Just give it your best shot. Jin blurred out of existence as he rushed toward the blonde, who mere held out his arm, kunai aimed forward. He smirked suddenly, and his arm moved far faster than the eye could see, thrusting the kunai deep into Jin's side with a spray of crimson. The werewolf roared in pain and wrenched the blade free, but not fast enough as the black scroll written upon its surface had already wormed its way into his fur and onto his skin. The youkai clutched his ribs with labored breaths as he attempted to stop the bleeding and grinned weakly at Naruto. That's it, huh? One hit. How'd you even do that, anyway? The wave of energy in all directions, but held at a certain point so that it retains its potency. It acts like a perimeter alarm, so that when the wall is breached it alerts me instantly, and luckily my reflexes were enough to land a clean hit on you. Jin grunted. Alright, I'll admit that was pretty clever, but now that I know, I won't let it get me again. Your last ace in the hole is all used up, Uzumaki Naru, huh? He stopped suddenly. Just where was the blonde, anyway? He'd seemingly vanished mid-conversation, without a trace. You just had to go and say it, didn't you? Man, have you villains got some kinda fetish for the whole you have nothing left to use against me line? Cause it gets pretty old, especially when you're me. I always have an ace in the hole. Jin turned to the source of the voice, directly behind him, only for the space to be empty. Then, all of a sudden, his entire body lurched to the side as something crashed into his side with the force of a runaway freight train, and he found himself hurtling toward the edge of the rooftop. A hand wrapped around his wrist and caused him to jerk backwards painfully, but the youkai silently thanked whoever had caught him, having saved him from falling several stories. No matter how strong he was, that wasn't particularly pleasant. He looked up, and his gleaming red eyes met with a cold stare from Naruto. You Uzumaki. You should be grateful, he said icily, dropping the canine beast to the floor. Not only did I save you that fall, but I resorted to using the only memento of my parents to defeat you without too much property damage. Jin's eyes widened as his fur retreated into his skin. He winced as he tried to sit up. With how much his ribs were hurting from the hastily formed Rasengan, the fight was as good as over for how much of a match he'd be against the blonde, and despite his pride he knew when he'd been beaten. He stopped for a moment and simply stared at the blonde, even as he turned his back on the elder student and began to walk away. If you have any kind of morality, you lay off Moka-chan and the other girls in this school to pay off your debt to me. Otherwise Naruto paused for a moment and shot a frigid glare over his shoulder, his eyes gleaming a burning scarlet that seared Jin's very soul. I'll kick your goddamn head in, hear me Morioka. Jin didn't answer. There was no need. Naruto-kun Moka started and hesitated. An awkward silence had pervaded around their party as they retreated from the rooftop, and the vampire Crisette had been laboring in her mind to try and word the question that had been tearing at her. What you said to Jin, was it true? Was what true? She flinched. Naruto's tone chilled her, though it wasn't quite as merciless as the one he'd used on the werewolf. She hadn't ever seen him truly angry, the rage that flooded from him when he fought Kamiya Saizu had belonged to whatever lived inside him rather than his own. She hadn't been present when he fought Kurumu. And what he displayed against the lizardman from Yukari's class was more like annoyance than actual anger. Now, though the way his body was tensed up, fists clenched so tightly she could smell the crimson lifeblood oozing from his palms and eyes flickered, a furious orange red, something seemed to be bothering far more than anything before. What you said about your parents? About the memento? Naruto sighed and ran a hand through his hair. That kunai belonged to my father. When he was alive, he used to use it for a technique called the Flying Thunder God, which allowed him to travel great distances, almost instantly using one of those kunai as a marker. I may have told a small lie. I have a few more of those kunai in my dorm, but that's not entirely the point, is it? The fact is, together those kunai are the only things I have left of either of my parents, so I'd rather nor squander them or use them at all if I can avoid it. The fact that I had to use one of them on an ass like Jin, just so I didn't destroy either him or the school, kinda pisses me off. Naruto trailed off as he felt it tugging on his sleeve and looked down. Yukari was staring up at him with wide eyes that made her look positively adorable, though it looked as if she was struggling with her words. And then Naruto-kun, if that's how you feel then please have this. She held up something she'd obviously been hiding. The same kunai he'd driven between Jin's ribs, now clean of his blood and unfortunately of the Horatian marker seals, clutched firmly between her small hands, as if it were some kind of lifeline. Naruto's eyes widened considerably. I was planning on keeping it. So that I'd have something of yours and we'd be closer. But if it means so much to you, you can have it. To the young border being, it was a surprise to see Naruto smile warmly and slowly lift the blade to the light, inspecting it. Usually the seals stay on the blade, but since I made them transfer onto Jinn to use him as the target instead, I guess I'll need to replace them. He grinned at Yukari. I'll tell you what, I'll put the seals back on, and then you can keep it. She looked up to him with an incredulous look. After all, if you keep hold of it, I can protect you. Yukari blushed brightly at that, and she hid her face as Naruto turned the blade over in his hands with a small smile. Moka silently thanked the young witch. Whatever she'd done, she'd somehow managed to lighten Naruto's mood almost instantly. A single crimson eye spun slowly as it watched Naruto examine the Harem kunai from the sloped roof of the school building, and an amused chuckle sounded from behind the spiral-marked orange mask as the three black magatama-like marks circled the single, small pupil. The dark figure's black hooded cloak, emblazoned with crimson clouds, billowed in the wind as he rose to his full height, his fists clenching as his chuckles descended into a maniacal cackle. Just a little more, Naruto-kun. A little more, and then your allies might just be enough to test Sasuke-kun's potential and make the effort of capturing you worth it. Naruto-kun. Naruto's head jerked up from the hard surface of his desk, sending the multitude of kunai, scrolls and brushes clattering to the floor. It had been mid-afternoon when he started. He'd bolted out of class, earning a plethora of confused stares as he raced through the school and shut himself in his dorm room without another word. His father's scroll was laid out upon his desk, the remaining 9 Harem kunai and single-used blade placed equidistant from each other atop it, with a calligraphy set to the side. Now, bars of pale moonlight were thrown across the room through the wide window, bathing it in a ghostly white hue, broken only by the short burst of color in his decorations. He must have worked himself too hard, he realized, looking down at the half-finished kunai on his desk. The seals were intricate beyond belief, and making even a single mistake could mean disaster on a universal scale. Space-time techniques were dangerous things to mess around with, and getting the slightest curve wrong as he copied the seals from another could result in a tear in the very fabric of reality. But the risk was well worth it. He wanted desperately for Yukari to keep one with her so that he could protect her even when he wasn't around, which surprised him a little. Why was he so serious about defending these 4 girls that had wormed their ways into his life that he'd use his father's prized kunai to do so? Are you alright, Naruto-kun? He looked up to meet the worried eyes of his friend and old partner and smiled weakly. Sigh. He hesitated for a moment, then shook his head from side to side. Silly me. Must have fallen asleep at the work table. His hands moved to pick up the clutter from the floor and continue working, but Sai's hand on his wrist stopped him. He gave the Rude a questioning look. What are you? You can't seriously consider continuing, can you? Look at you, Naruto. You're exhausted, and rightly so. Even the number 1 hyperactive knucklehead ninja has to take a break sometime or you'll just fall apart at the seams. What are you talking about? I feel He cried in pain as Sai's grip on his wrist tightened and he turned a glare on the dark-haired boy. I'm guessing you were unaware that I know a sufficient amount about psychology. I can read you, Naruto. You're working yourself to the bone and however much you'd like to deny it, it shows. What are you so scared will happen if you don't finish those kunai? Is it the girls? Are you worried something bad will happen to them? I don't know. Naruto snapped and Sai recoiled for a moment. Naruto had yelled at him before, but not quite like that. He wasn't angry. He was anxious, paranoid, saddened even, but not angry. If he had been, his voice would have been overwhelmed with a soft growl, like that of a dog, rather than the weak tremble that Naruto must have noticed as he fell silent. I have no idea what I'm afraid of. What could hurt them here in Youkai Academy? The damned headmaster's some kind of god, after all. And it's not like I'm going anywhere. He sighed deeply and leant back in his chair, brushing his hair from his eyes. But no matter how hard I try to convince myself, I can't shake the feeling something bad's coming. Something I can't run away from and I can't just blow up at like other problems. I don't want Moka or Yukari or any of them to get involved, but I just don't think it'll be that easy. So you want to prepare them. Give them a means to stay safe long enough for you to deal with your problem and protect them with all of your strength. Naruto didn't reply, but that must have been all the answer Sai needed as he gave a small laugh. I can never seem to figure out whether this noble streak of yours is charming or just plain irritating. You've got a good heart, Naruto. I know I'm not the first to say that. But you can't help anyone if you're dead on your feet, so get some rest already. Naruto opened his mouth to retort but thought better of it. With a groan as he stretched out his tired muscles, Naruto rose from his chair and moved towards his bed, stopping only for a moment. Sigh. The Anbu gave an interested hum. Thanks. And I don't if I ever said this before, but you're a good friend. Naruto's words seemed to echo in the silence of the night and brought a warm smile to Sai's face. A real smile. He fidgeted with the collar of his white school shirt and the crimson tie around his neck. Naruto-kun, you have no idea how much that means to me. He turned to leave through the window rather than the locked front door, but his eyes were drawn to the scattered materials with which Naruto was transcribing the Horatian seals onto Yukari's knife. A thought came to him, and he smiled. I suppose it would be the least I could do for you. With all the grace his years of shinobi training had granted him, he descended into Naruto's recently vacated chair and took up his brush, dabbing it in the jet black ink and bringing its curled tip to the steel surface with a mechanical precision as he traced the Horatian's complex seals onto the blade. And there he sat, working, long into the night. Whatever you decide is dear to you, Naruto, I'll help you protect it. As your friend. What do you think? Yukari couldn't answer. Her mouth hung open in a look of unbridled awe at the knife before her. True, it didn't look all that different than it did before, its 3 prongs glinted in the light, painted with a light crimson gloss so that it had a coppery shine, and a red ribbon hung from its circular pommel. To the young witch, however, it was amazing. She tentatively took the kunai and turned it over in her hands, examining it in all its glory. It wasn't a knife. It was the confirmation, not that she truly needed any, that Naruto truly cared about her. That he would protect her with his life if she were in danger. Hello? Earth to Yukari. Oh, Naruto-kun, she started, snapping out of her trance. Sorry, I must have spaced out, it's beautiful. I'm glad you like it, Naruto said with a grin, and shared a conspiratorial look with Sai, who was watching with an amused look as he rested his head in a palm, elbows propped up on the desk he'd swapped with Saizu. It had been surprising how eager the large boy had been to stay as far away as possible from the blonde as possible. Strange. Like it? It didn't look like anyone was going to get much more from the small girl, as she stared absent-mindedly at the kunai in her hands with a blush on her cheeks. Naruto looked about the class to see that a few people were looking over at the strange group of students, but most were absorbed in the conversations they'd struck up to pass the time until the teacher arrived. And then, there was. Hey, whose seat is that? He pointed at the seat situated directly in front of him, at the very front of the class and next to the window. He'd never actually seen anyone take the seat before, yet no one had ever commented about it, as if it were a natural occurrence. It wasn't often that seats went unfilled, especially in the front row. Moka and Kurumu looked at each other for a moment and seemed to have a silent conversation between them. Hey, your class representative, Kurumu finally said. You tell him. Alright. Well, according to the roster, that seat belongs to Shirayuki Mizer, but not once has she ever come to claw. Moka stopped abruptly as the door opened and 2 people walked in. One was easily recognizable as Nekonim Shizuka, striding into the class and placing the stack of books in her arms down on her desk. The other, however, was not so familiar. She, for it was certainly a she, looked absently around the room until her pupilless, sapphire eyes fell on him and stayed there, unflinching. Her mouth hung open slightly so that her lollipop balanced precariously on her pale pink bottom lip and her breath seemed to crystallize in the air despite the relatively warm temperature. One hand, half hidden behind the long sleeve of the white tee she wore in place of the uniform dress shirt, twirled a lock of lavender around her forefinger in an alluring manner, while the other fidgeted with the hem of her pleated skirt, drawing the blonde's attention to the striped purple stockings that stretched the length of her long, slender legs. Naruto stared openly at her as she slid gracefully into her seat and pressed her back against the window so that her body faced the class. Her eyes, however, never left Naruto. You're Uzumaki Naruto, right? She whispered as Nekonim began the lesson. Naruto stared deadpan at the girl. She doesn't show up for class for over a week, then turns up like nothing happened and decides to take an interest in him. The chances were infinitesimally small. Then, all of a sudden, the girl leant over the desk toward him and stared him dead in the face, her cold breath tickling his skin. She licked her bottom lip, lollipop stick twitching as she did so, and her eyes flickered between Naruto's ocean blue orbs and his gaping mouth. Was she going to kiss him? He blushed, and it didn't settle anything in him to see that she did as well. You're cuter than I imagined. You're not bad yourself. What was he saying? Not only should he not be flirting with this weird girl, but that was lame. You're Shirayuki, right? She didn't answer. Naruto's heart rate skyrocketed as she leant past him and placed her lips beside his ear so that the chill of her breath caused the hairs on his neck to stand on end. Please, she whispered, sending a pleasant shiver down his spine. Call me Mizer. A furious shriek pervaded the relative silence of the room as the rest of the class listened to Nekonim's lecture, and Kurumu's chair fell to the floor with a clatter as she rose to her feet, leveling her glare on Mizer, whose blush still lit up her cheeks. Naruto leant backwards in his seat, putting himself far out of the line of fire between the 2 females. He knew from experience that Kurumu could be incredibly possessive when the situation arose, and Mizer had practically been all over him without so much as an introduction. What the hell do you think you're doing, skank? Naruto winced. Harsh wording, but from the impassive expression on Mizer's delicate features, she hadn't paid it any mind. Get your face off my Naruto-kun before I tear you a new one, here and now. Nekonim had stopped the lesson momentarily and even she gaped at the confrontation. Naruto could have yelled at her. Why didn't she do anything to stop her? Granted, Kurumu was like a charging rhino when she got going, but she was a teacher for Kami's sake. Does he belong to you? What? Kurumu stuttered. The question had thrown her for a loop for a moment, as had the nonchalant manner in which she posed it. Mizer stared. I said, does he belong to you? Are you his girlfriend? Are you dating? She pressed, and Kurumu stammered weakly. No. Then he's fair game, isn't he? Mizer flung her arms around Naruto's neck and pulled herself close to him, using him as leverage to sit atop his desk. She might as well have been in his lap. Naruto blushed darkly. Didn't he get a say in this? He knew better than to voice his question, of course. He didn't need the ire of both females directed toward him. Even now, he could see Kurumu barely restraining the urge to take Mizer's face off. He sent a pleading look at Nekonim, and she seemed to give in. That's enough, both of you. Kurono-kun, Shirayuki-kun, please return to your seats. If you must fight over Uzumaki-kun, do it during your time, rather than mine. That was not what he meant. Still, it seemed to placate both girls, as Kurumu slowly returned her chair to an upright position and took her seat, and Mizer snaked her arms from around his neck, albeit reluctantly, and sat down at her own desk. Still, the look between the two, the heated glare that promised a final deathmatch, could have sparked lightning. The class filed from the room noisily an hour later, and Mizer slid her book into her bag and kicked back her seat. The wooden back collided with Naruto's long-vacated desk with a loud crash. She looked in the direction of the door, where even now she could hear Kurumu chewing the blonde out. She thought she'd raised a fair point. From what she'd gathered, the succubus held no claim to him, or at least far less than she, someone who'd adored him for so long. Her form hugged the doorframe tightly as she moved across the classroom with a dancer's grace, barely making a sound as her feet glided across the floor, and she watched with a single amethyst eye as Kurumu clutched at Naruto's lapels with long claw-like nails. What, exactly, was that about? She hissed, and Naruto tried in vain to shy away from her baleful glare. Mizer's nails dug into the wooden frame, and a soft hiss escaped her pale lips. How dare she talk to him like that? Treat him like that? She shouldn't even be able to stand near him. Oh, how she wished to storm over and tear the succubus to shreds, but that wouldn't be right. She needed to be more subtle, else whatever she did would only drive Naruto away and drive her into madness. Her eyes bore into Naruto with a longing gaze, and her attention was so focused on him that she didn't even notice the light frost gathering on the wall beside her. Her eyes drifted to Kurumu and Moka, the vampire stood at her side, and she scowled. Something would need to be done about that. I really wish I knew, Kurumu-chan. Something ached inside her. Why was he so familiar with her? Wonder why Mizer Shirayuki-san acted like that. Ouch. Not only did he revert to referring to her by her last name, though the small slip-up had brought a cheer to her heart for the slightest moment, but he was blind to her feelings. Granted, she'd met him only that day and had said only a handful of words to him in person, but surely what she'd said and how she'd said it should have gotten the point across effectively. Well, find out and fix it. Get it over with before the meeting, or we're gonna have problems. Kurumu shoved Naruto back a little and stormed off, dragging Moka behind her, despite the rosette's soft near-silent whimper, as she was forcibly removed from the presence of her Naruto-kun. This was her chance, she realized. Without any of the females in his unwitting harem, she could approach Naruto without fear of intrusion. Yet, when her eyes fell upon the blonde once more, she hesitated, her mouth parted only slightly as she gasped. Naruto swept a hand through his hair, the blonde mess perfecting at his rough touch, while the other was thrust deeply into his pocket. He leant back leisurely, and his muscles were both relaxed and tensed simultaneously, like he was calm and collected, yet ready to kill at the drop of a hat. It was so exciting. To know that someone so strong and deadly, like a living weapon, could at the same time be the sweet caring person she'd seen in his writing and the bright cheerful character she'd seen firsthand, it was mind-boggling. And all of those would be all hers, as soon as she took the few steps forward and actually talked to him. And Mizer cursed herself. She couldn't even manage a coherent word, and that feeling grew to unbearable levels when he turned to her and stared into her eyes with those gorgeous sapphire orbs. Oh, Shirayuki. She flinched. I didn't expect to see you there. Did you need something? A soft blush came to her cheeks, and her hands shook uncontrollably as she removed them from the hem of her skirt. All she needed to do was say something. Not too difficult. Just open her mouth and allow some intelligible speech to pour out. Wanted to. Do you have a spare newspaper? She all but yelled and cursed herself. That was stupid, no matter how she looked at it. Her newspaper clipping needn't be her only link to him anymore, now that he was standing right in front of her. But old habits die hard. And why on earth did she need to yell? Naruto stared at her for a moment before searching his pockets and pulling out a crumpled roll of printed paper, tied shut with a rubber band, and handed it to her. Here you go. He gave a small chuckle. Honestly, I didn't think you'd be all that interested in the school newspaper, what with the fact you're almost never in school. Mizer allowed a small smile. Obviously her blunder had been lost on him. Not the newspaper. You. At Naruto's raised eyebrow she reached into her bag and pulled out the beautiful blue and gold scrapbook she'd spent many an hour compiling and creating. She held it close to her chest, embracing it tightly, to the point where Naruto could only just see Mizer's name on the cover behind her closed arms. I've read every news report you've written. When I was away from school, I requested that Nekonom-sensei send me each and every issue that came out. Her glittering amethyst eyes met with his, and she smiled warmly. She could feel her confidence building with each and every word, and soon she'd be able to. I love the way you write, because your work reflects you as a person. You're strong outwardly, but inside you've known pain just as much, if not more than anyone else. What are you? Naruto stuttered weakly as Mizer stepped forward and pressed herself flush against his chest, wide lavender eyes looking up at him with such adoration. He could feel the biting cold of her skin through her clothes, but it didn't feel particularly harsh. Pleasant shivers coursed across his skin, leaving raised goosebumps in their wake. That weak persona, the pain behind the mask, that's your true self, isn't it? Her hand alighted on his shoulder, light as a feather, and she pulled herself up towards his face. I like that side of you. I can relate to him. Naruto tried to pull away, but Mizer's grip on him was surprisingly strong. It must be lonely, not having anyone to understand your pain. I know that feeling. So don't be lonely anymore. Naruto-kun's late. Kurumu looked up from her notepad. Moka was sat at the lone table in the newspaper club's headquarters, chin rested in her delicate dainty palm as she gazed almost longingly at the closed door. The succubus sighed and put her pen down beside her, swinging her legs over the windowsill which had quickly been designated her spot. Perhaps she had been a little harsh on Naruto earlier, after all, it wasn't his fault that Shirayuki came on to him so forwardly. Get it over with before the meeting, or we're gonna have problems. She hadn't truly meant that, of course. It was no secret that she disliked Shirayuki, but time with Naruto far outclassed being rid of that ugh. She couldn't even think of a good enough insult. The horrible knowledge that Naruto was somewhere out there with Shirayuki, rather than here with her, just drove her round the bend. Another sigh escaped her lips, and she leapt down from the window to the floor, causing Moka to look round at her. Is something wrong, Kurumu-chan? She packed her pen and notepad away in her bag and slung it over her shoulder, before moving to the door. I'll go find Naruto-kun and bring him back here. God knows what that Shirayuki girl is doing to him right now. She flinched at her own words, and it didn't help to see Moka do the same. It was easy to discredit her fears when she thought she was the only one with them, but knowing Moka was thinking the same made them seem all the more real. She forced herself to smile, grinning awkwardly at the vampire, even as she gripped the doorknob tight enough to bend it. Don't you worry, and don't move an inch. I'll have Naruto back before you know it. She slammed the door shut behind her and began to take off down the hall. It was eerily silent, even for late afternoon, when most other students would either be in extracurricular clubs, on the grounds, or in their dorms. Not a soul wandered the corridors save for her, and that fact just made her more paranoid. She turned a corner to leap down the stairs, only to come face to face with the person she didn't want to find. What are you doing here, Shirayuki? She spat, her muscles tensed as she readied herself for a fight. She wasn't one to jump to violence as a first option, but the cold look in the girl's eyes set a primal animal fear in her. She had no idea what her foe was capable of, and it was highly likely that Shirayuki knew everything about her. Where's Naruto-kun? The purple-haired girl simply stared blankly at her, and all of a sudden, in a flurry of sub-zero temperatures and gleaming eyes, the world turned black. Now you try, Naruto. He caught the small, flat stone deftly between his index and middle fingers and looked at it for a moment before looking to Mizer. Her entire demeanor practically screamed cheerful. She was bouncing around on the balls of her feet and her hands were clasped under her chin as she smiled warmly. Whatever it was that he was doing, it obviously made her happy, so who was he to deny her that? The pebble spun between his callous digits and his arm reared back before snapping forward sharply. A stone flew from his hand and bounced once on the water's calm surface, sending wide ripples across the once placid exterior, and continued on through the air where it traversed the entire pool and tore through the tree on the other side, shattering the aged bark like rice paper. He winced. Whatever was going on with his body, what with the incident with the chakra paper and now this uncontrollable physical strength, it was steadily getting worse. Amazing. Mizer cried, staring at Naruto with wide eyes. He scratched the back of his head nervously and turned away from the disturbed pool of water. Sorry to cut this short, but I really need to head back. He moved to leave, only to stop as Mizer draped herself over his shoulders. Her face nuzzled into the side of his neck and her body was pressed against his back, bringing a pale blush to his cheeks. Shirayuki, what are you doing? You can't leave, not until I beat you. She chirped happily, hugging the blonde close to her. Her smile quickly faded, though, and she frowned. You can't go back to that club of yours." Naruto shivered as her already low body temperature dropped to dangerous levels and her grip around his neck tightened, burying herself into him. "If I were to lose you. If you were to go back to that Akashiya Moka you adore so much, I don't know what I'd do. So don't find out. Just stay here with me. All you need to do is just be mine." The world around them seemed to freeze over as the lake turned to solid ice and the soft breeze became a merciless arctic gale that tore at his skin like thousands upon thousands of knives. The frost gathered on the ground and rose into crystalline spires around him and quickly spread out into thick wide plates of glittering diamond that were horribly familiar to him as his eyes grew wide. Mirrors. At least a dozen of them. All around him, closing him in a dome. "I won't let you run away. We were destined to meet and together we'll warm each other's frozen hearts." Naruto stared at her incredulously as she stepped away from him, twirling with the grace of a dancer and smiling at her reflection in one of the mirrors. She sent him a glance over her shoulder. "After all, you'll never find someone else who knows that pain you hide. Stick around a while and I'm sure you'll never be able to leave." "I can't stay here. I have to go back," Naruto cried. Miser scowled and rounded on him. Her hands were coated with ice, turning them into vicious-looking claws that glinted in the sunlight as she raised them to Naruto's face. Naruto stumbled backwards, but his back collided with another mirror, blocking his escape. Back to Akashiya Moka. Back to Kurumu and Sendu Yukari and Hisakawa Minami. Every one of them, everyone who stands in the way of my love for you should just disappear. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Stop it. You can't just get rid of them because you don't like them. It doesn't work like that. Miser stepped back, placing a clawed hand against her chest with a hurt look that made Naruto's chest ache. He tried to reach out to her, but she moved out of his range and stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. "Why are you saying this? You should understand how it feels to be lonely." Naruto gritted his teeth and clenched his fingers into fists. Yes, he knew what it was like to be alone. That horrible solitude had suffocated his childhood self. "Yeah, I know exactly how you feel." Miser's heart soared but immediately plummeted again as Naruto looked at her with cold blue eyes like chips of ice, nothing like the warm pools of sapphire that she'd fallen in love with. "But I don't feel lonely anymore because I have friends. Friends that you're trying to slaughter because you think they're in your way. That's why." "No." Miser cut him off with a scream, clutching at her head with her claws of crystal. "You can't reject me. You can't reject my feelings. That's not how I imagined this at all." Spears of ice began to form from the smooth surfaces of the mirrors and shot out at Naruto. The blonde leapt backwards out of their path, leaving the long spikes to penetrate deep into the soil beneath his feet. "You were supposed to fall in love with me the same way I love you and we would be together forever. Don't take that dream away from me." "Stop this, Shirayuki," Naruto cried, dodging another spear of diamond as it plunged into the earth to his left. "No, you don't understand me at all. No one understands me." Iced wind seemed to explode out of her as she screamed, tearing at Naruto's skin as he struggled to stay standing against the terrible onslaught of frozen gales. "Stay away. Stay away. Naruto-kun." Naruto looked to the side and between the mirrors he saw Sai and Minami dropping from a hawk formed from Sai's Chiaoju Giga. "Stay put, we'll get you out. Minami, can you break the ice?" The Taki Kunoichi grinned and pumped a fist in the air. "You bet your ass I can. Dim a minute." "No, stop." Both shinobi hesitated at Naruto's cry. "You can't do that or she'll only become more unstable. Just stay where you are, I'll have this fixed in no time." They stared at him wordlessly for a moment but soon nodded. Naruto turned back to Miser, whose very skin was beginning to take on an icy sheen as her powers ran out of control. It's time to try out this new fire affinity Kaiten. Zikoku." A bullet of flame erupted from Naruto's throat and soared through the air, slamming into the frozen ground at Miser's feet with an explosion of blazing orange and red. The mirrors shattered like glass as the shockwave tore through them and the ice that coated the surroundings melted almost instantly under the intense heat. Two blurs shot from within the cloud of fire. Miser's body hurtled out of the blaze and slammed into the ground with a painful impact, rolling helplessly across the grass until she finally came to a stop. That she muttered weakly, struggling to push herself up on weak arms. Naruto had attacked her. I should have known. Another spear of ice formed in her hand, only to be stopped as a firm hand gripped her wrist, holding it fast. There, silhouetted against the rising flames, was the blonde she'd been so obsessed with and, though she was loath to admit it after this, she still adored. "That's enough, Shirayuki Miser." Her eyes widened as she processed his words. He'd called her by her first name again. It sounded so beautiful from him, even with the harsh, serious look his face was twisted into. Her will to fight began to fade away, and with it the power that held her eyes together, causing the spear in her hand to splinter into thousands of minuscule shards of glittering crystal. I understand what you've gone through. For the first 12 years of my life, I thought I was alone. I was hated, shunned, and treated like a monster by almost everyone around me. Almost. There were that small few that saw me as a normal person and didn't shut me out or even treat me badly. They were my friends, and because of them I'm not alone anymore. That's all you need to stop the pain of loneliness. Friends. But Miser started quietly, but stopped as Naruto rose from his crouched position to stand at his full height. He thrust out a hand towards her, and she stared at it as if it were some alien being. So, Shirayuki Miser, do you want to be friends with me? How long is this going to take? We've been ready for a week now. The single crimson eye turned to look into a scowling pair of its brethren, set into the skull of a teen, his arms crossed over his chest as he shot a demanding glare at the cloaked man through the shadow of his dark fringe. The cloaked man leant backwards as he sat on the edge of the academic building, stretching out his limbs with a tired groan. Whether you're ready or not is irrelevant. We're waiting for him to be ready. We are shinobi, not samurai. There's no code of honor requiring both sides be prepared for battle before engaging in it. That's true, but the world has been waiting for this battle for a long time. It wouldn't do to start it prematurely. It wouldn't be nearly as interesting then. It's when you say things like that I question your true motives. This operation's goal is to extract the Kyuubi's chakra, right? You don't have some secondary objective. I assure you, Sasuke-kun. If I had any ulterior motives, you would be the first to know. The masked man turned back to look over the destruction caused by Naruto and Miser's battle. Besides, you needn't wait any longer. I think he's just about ready now. We'll begin soon. It's been so long, dope. I wonder, are you as happy to see me as I am to see you? Naruto's eyes creaked open weakly, squinting against the blazing purple light that filled his vision. Violet flames of chakra wrapped around Susanu's enormous beastly form as it eyed him skeptically from deep within its beak-like helm. Its hand gripped its bow tightly, twitching ever so slightly as it readied to attack, and raised the orb of roiling black flame to its string, and formed an arrow, a solid bar of obsidian fire. And there, stood safe and protected within the belly of the beast, staring him down with spheres of crimson and black, was his old teammate, friend, and pseudo-brother, Uchiha Sasuke. What are you doing, Sasuke? Naruto asked, pulling himself tiredly to his feet. Each and every muscle of his body rebelled against him, screaming out in agony. He felt like he'd just fought his way down to hell and back, he was so tired. He idly noted that he wasn't actually standing on anything. A dream then, he mused, and slowly slipped into a fighting stance as he prepared for battle. Even if it was a dream, he would fight if he needed to. Even if it meant battling for God knows how long in this near-empty void of indomitable blackness. You may not believe me, but I'm genuinely glad to see that you've survived thus far, the Uchiha continued as if he hadn't heard the blonde at all, closing his Sharingan eyes for but a moment before opening them again to a sharp chilling stare, filled with the cursed power of his new eternal Manjikyu Sharingan. If you died too early, I couldn't very well get the power I needed for my revenge, now could I? Naruto laughed hollowly, rubbing the back of his neck. So, you're after the fuzzball as well. Why am I not surprised? His eyes hardened for but a moment as he rolled to the side, evading the powerful strike of Susanu's arrow, as it collided with the ground like a bolt from God, erupting into a Stygian blaze that very nearly caught him in its blast radius despite his movements. Another arrow drew mere inches from his faces as it hurtled past, and he could feel the heat of Amaterasu's flames along its shaft against the skin of his cheek before it too exploded into a writhing mass of heat behind him. Your aim is weak, Sasuke. I thought those eyes were supposed to improve your eyesight. Sasuke's eyes flashed with anger, and he roared furiously. Susanu's bow-wielding left arm rose high into the sky, and in a flash the thin bow had morphed into a thick katana-like blade, its curved edge slicing the very air as it descended toward the blonde, who sidestepped the swing as if it were nothing. You've changed, dope. Where's the stupid little kid who fights every battle all out straight from the start? With how blasé you're acting about all this, you seem more like Kakashi. Naruto laughed again, one hand forced into his pocket while the other rose into the air. My personality isn't all that's changed, team. With that, his rough palm clamped down on the dull edge of Susanu's sword, much to Sasuke's surprise. The violet flames seemed to part at his touch, leaving only a solid bar of pure chakra between his calloused fingertips. Power recognizes power, Sasuke. Then you shouldn't even be able to comprehend me. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise as Sasuke's words sounded behind him, and even more so as a thin spear of blue and white lanced through his chest, bolts of electricity arcing from its surface as it tore through his flesh, sending a spray of crimson into the air. Naruto awoke with a start, clutching at his chest as it heaved with ragged, labored breaths. His fingers roamed the rigid musculature and felt the cold, clammy skin. The wound wasn't there, of course. It was only a dream. so why did it feel so real? Why could he feel the excruciating burn of the Chidori Isu clawing at his flesh, breaking it down at a cellular level as it gored him? Why could he feel the steadily slowing beat of his heart as his body grew cold, his life leaving him? And why was he dreaming about Sasuke now of all times? It had been months since they'd last fought, and he'd all but forgotten about the last uchiha, what with the hectic lifestyle he now led as a student of Youkai Academy. His head sank into the pillow as he collapsed backwards with a tired sigh, staring at the blank whitewashed ceiling with dull blue eyes. This dream, or whatever it was too real to be just a product of his sleep-deprived imagination. Dreams like this didn't happen by coincidence, it meant something. What it meant, he didn't know, but that wasn't the point. All he needed was the proof that something was wrong, just so he didn't feel so paranoid. RNNN stopped moving. Naruto froze in place. To his right, he could see the bubblegum pink hair contrasting heavily in the darkness of his dorm room and the slight pressure on his ribs as his vampira classmate buried herself into his side, moaning softly in contentment as she nuzzled her crimson cheek into his shoulder. Normally, this wouldn't bother him as much as it would in his childhood. What bothered him was the fact that the sound hadn't come from his right side. With no small amount of fear apparent in his eyes, Naruto slowly turned his head to the left to see a slender female figure in very much the same position as Moka, though the manner in which her arms and legs wrapped around his body gave an impression of possessiveness. Sleeping with a content smile as she rested her head on his chest under a mane of violet, her cold breath tickling his skin as it filtered between her parted lips, wrapped around the stick of another lollipop. Miser. He hissed in surprise, instinctively trying to remove himself from the Yuki-ana's grasp, only to stop as he realized that with the tight grip of both monstrously powerful females on various parts of his body, there was simply no room for movement. That, and he was discouraged by the angered groans and growl, both released in their sleep as he tried to shift. It was then that he realized one thing that could either save or damn him, depending on his own actions. While Moka had at least the decency to crawl into his bed wearing a lacy white camisole and matching boy shirts, Miser was not so reserved. Hence the feel of her cold skin flush against his. He had to think fast, else he'd be caught in a very compromising situation, and while Miser might not mind much, he had a sneaking suspicion that Moka would have words about it, as would Kurumu whenever she decided to make her appearance. Naruto swallowed hard. What he was about to do could cause him serious injury if he were to do it incorrectly. He brought his hands to the girl's exposed sides and gently trailed his middle finger over their ribs, his fingertip dancing ever so delicately over their soft skin. His cheeks were crimson and his hands shaky, but nonetheless he continued. It was do or die. Eventually, his ministrations had the desired effect as both girls giggled cutely in their respective slumbers and shifted their positions, giving Naruto a momentary window of opportunity. He was across the room, a pillow in his place for the two girls to hug to themselves, before anyone was the wiser. The H that he breathed, pressing a palm to his chest in an attempt to calm his thumping heart, was more dangerous than fighting pain. If only he could have been defeated as easily. With a sigh he moved through the darkness of his room to the small kitchen, grabbing a glass from the cupboard and filling it under the tap. For a moment he pressed the ice-cold glass of water to his forehead, cooling it considerably, before taking a long draught of the clear liquid. Ah, he sighed, before downing the rest of it. That hit the spot. How long have I got left till morning? The chirping of birds outside his window, which he always kept open whatever the weather, answered him almost instantly. Guess I'd better start getting ready for class then. He grabbed his uniform from the dresser and moved to the bathroom to change away from the prying eyes of the two girls, who he knew could wake up at any time, when he noticed something on the floor before his front door, like it had been slipped under in the night. That wasn't there last night, guess I'd better take a look. He set down his clothes and picked up the object, a pink envelope decorated with various scribbles, which appeared to be crude drawings of hearts and roses. Upon the front stood his name, bold black ink contrasting heavily with the pale pink paper, and his class number written underneath. He quirked an eyebrow. A love letter. The idea wasn't foreign to him at all, it was just the fact that never had one been given to him. Though, considering his new popularity among the female population of Youkai Academy, he wasn't totally surprised. He flicked open the envelope and gently pulled out the folded sheet, the same soft pink paper used for the letter itself, and decorated with the same untidy sketches. His eyes scanned the elegant, flowing, and obviously very practiced script upon its face, his brow never leaving its raised position. Dear Uzumaki-kun. You probably have no idea who I am, and I don't blame you. I've been trying to work up the courage to tell you since I saw you on the first day of term, but I could never quite find the words to say it until now. I like you. This probably seems silly to you, considering you've never met me, and you're already surrounded by other girls far more beautiful and suited to you than I, but I just can't let myself regret not telling you. Ever since I saw you at the welcoming ceremony, smiling like you do when talking with Akashiya-san, I've not been able to sleep for thinking of you. I just want you to know my feelings for you before it becomes too late. If it isn't too much trouble to you, I'd appreciate it greatly if we could talk together after class tomorrow. Even if I can't have your heart, I'd still like to be your friend if possible. I really hope you don't think of me as creepy or something because of all this. Yours hopefully, Watanabe Junko. After he'd finished reading, Naruto stared blankly at the letter for a moment and read it again. Was this girl serious? She was right in that he'd never met her or even heard of her, so why was it that she showed such a vested interest in him of all people? Suddenly, something caught his attention and his nose wrinkled in disgust. He sniffed the letter tentatively, only to recoil with a look of horror as he gagged on the copious, almost suffocating amounts of cheap perfume that the paper had been subjected to. He was honestly surprised it wasn't turned to a dripping pulp. He held both letter and envelope at arm's length as he carefully fed the former back into the latter before closing it and shoving it forcefully into the pocket of his school trousers and pulling them on. He'd have to give this Junko a few tips on proper love letter etiquette later on. After all, it couldn't hurt to just talk to the girl, could it? I don't like this, Kurumu stated firmly as she crossed her arms under her bosom. Not one bit. No one asked you, cow tits, Yukari retorted, earning her glare from the brunette. But, despite how loath I am to actually admit it, I have to agree with her. The little witch nodded knowledgeably, smirking. This is quite obviously a trap orchestrated by this Watanabe-san, if that is her real name, to steal you away. Naruto-kun, you simply can't go with her. There's no telling what she'll do to make you hers. I honestly don't think I'm in any more danger than if you locked me in a room with Kurumu, Naruto replied, though seeing the gleam in the succubus's eye forced him to elaborate. That is not an invitation. Uzumaki-kun. A soft, timid voice broke through the terse conversing of the group and all eyes turned to the newcomer. It was a fairly nondescript girl, with long, straight brown hair, her bangs shadowing her eyes, while her fingers played with the hem of her skirt. She bit her lip as she grew visibly uneasy under the heated glares from the various females gathered around Naruto, Moka and Sai's desks. Naruto smiled warmly and stood up, parting the group of girls to stand before her, grinning down at her smaller frame. You must be Watanabe-san. She seemed to flinch at his words and nodded slowly. It's nice to finally meet you. Junko nodded again and stepped away from him, her fingers fiddling with each other as her nervousness grew and grew. Please follow me. She moved across the classroom at a quick pace, pushing several other students over as she made her path, and Naruto was forced to move almost at a jog to keep up with the girl's quick stride. The two of them traversed the hallway, Naruto's eyes fixated on her trembling back. I read your letter, Naruto began, attempting a conversation so as to alleviate Junko's discomfort somewhat. I gotta say, I'm pretty flattered that you think so highly of me despite how little we've tell. Not here. Naruto stopped talking suddenly and stared at the freshman in confusion. I mean, there are too many people here. I'd rather talk somewhere more private. Naruto's eyebrow arched and he shoved his hands into his pockets as he walked. Yeah, I guess I can understand that. Have they said anything yet? And not that I can tell, but Kurumu-san, should we really be doing something like this? Isn't it an invasion of privacy or something like that? Not unless you think of it like that. It's just taking a healthy interest in the daily workings of your love interest. Nice work on the invisibility spell by the way, Yukari. I never thought I'd see the day when you started complimenting me, cow tits. Yeah, well, don't get too comfortable with it. You're sure they won't be able to detect us? Watanabe-san, definitely. Unfortunately, I can't say for sure when it comes to Naruto-kun. He has a penchant for being unpredictable, Desu. Just make sure this veil is as thick as you can make it without exhausting yourself. We don't want Naruto-kun to realize we're following him or we'll never know what's going on. Here? Naruto asked incredulously as he and Junko finally reached their destination. It was the same pond he'd fought the lizardman from Yukari's class and the same place he'd trained Minami and Suiton ninjutsu. I know you wanted your privacy and all, but did we really need to come all the way out here? I didn't want Junko began, her hands busying themselves with the hem of her skirt once more. I didn't want anyone to hear us. Hear us? What exactly did you have in mind? Junko raised her head and stared directly into Naruto's eyes. His own widened considerably and his mouth dropped open in shock and surprise. I'm so sorry. Without a fringe to shadow her eyes, Naruto could see. He could see the hot tears spilling down her cheeks, marring her perfect porcelain skin with the angry red streaks they left in their wake. He could see her soft pink lips tremble as she sobbed, visibly distraught. And lastly, he could see her eyes, filled with sadness and regret, in the shape of three solid black tomo, circling a single, small pupil, all swimming in a crimson iris. Naruto stood frozen in place, staring at the power hidden within the girl's stare that seemed to mock him as it spun slowly. Sharingan. But how could that be? The only living person with a Sharingan, barring Tobi, was. Naruto's revelation was cut painfully short as he was forced to dodge the spear of electric blue that lanced through Junko's heart and continued onwards towards its true target. The innocent girl's body lurched forward with a blow, coughing up a spatter of crimson onto the grassy plain before she fell forward, lifeless, onto the Chidori Isu. Naruto gave the girl a short-lived look of pity and apology before he ducked under the slash from the lightning spear as it tore out of Junko's chest sideways, sending blood and gore into the air in a violent spray as her body crumpled to the ground. And there, stood behind the freshman girl's lifeless shell, was the one person that could have perpetrated this. Their reflexes have improved, dope, Uchiha Sasuke allowed as he recalled the Chidori Isu to his palm, dispelling it entirely with a flick of his wrist. You're also not as stupid if you knew not to trust that girl. The Uchiha's patronizing praise was cut short as Naruto's fist suddenly appeared only an inch before his face, plowing into his visage with the force of a freight train. He flew backwards and rolled across the grass, pushing himself up when he came to a stop. Why, Sasuke? Naruto demanded with a low growl. I understand you want to get at me, but you don't have to drag innocent people into this. He gestured towards Junko's corpse as crimson began to bleed into his sapphire eyes. She had no part of this. She could have quite easily lived her life without knowing either one of us, so why did you have to involve her in a mess that only got her killed long before her time? She was no more innocent than you are, dope. Naruto stopped. Their sins are no less grave than yours are. They aren't human. They're monsters, just like you. And just like you, their deaths will be the stepping stones to my ultimate revenge. To the complete and utter eradication of Konohagakure. With a low growl, Naruto leapt at his old rival, chakra coalescing in his palm to form a screeching Rasengan, whips of azure energy lashing out at the surroundings. Sasuke smirked arrogantly and raised his hand lazily, the signature bird-like chirping of his Chidori warring, with the howl of rushing winds, caused by the spiraling chakra for dominance over the air, as he thrust the lightning-clad palm forward to meet the Rasengan, in a powerful clash of energies that shattered the very earth beneath their feet with a shockwave. Both shinobi were thrown back by the blast, Sasuke grinding to a halt in the grass, while his old teammate slammed into the pond's bed with a violent spray of cold water. His body lay still, floating on the water's surface, but Sasuke didn't relax for a moment as his hand rested on the hilt of his kusanagi. He knew Naruto, there was no way in hell that would be enough to end him. His Sasuke shivered at the laugh, a confirmation of his suspicions. It didn't sound anything like the idiot he knew. It sounded like something else. Something inhuman. You always managed to impress me, team. Even the old nickname sounded twisted and wrong in that voice that simply wasn't that of Naruto. I thought I'd grown so much, but you've improved your own skills just as much, if not more. Otherwise that Rasengan would have crushed you. The water began to bubble as scarlet bled into it, rising as a vermilion steam that clouded the blonde's form, his shadowed silhouette just visible as he rose from the pond to stand at his full height, stretching out leisurely. Is that right? Sasuke inquired, his voice calm and collected despite the ominous chakra that weighed down the very air around him, turning it into a thick haze that pressed on every muscle of his body. Even that love letter. Naruto laughed, a violent barking cackle that caused the last Uchiha to flinch. Some of your greatest work, I think. The pink paper was a nice touch, but you suck at drawing. And was that Karen's perfume I smelled? Tell her she should get something more subtle and classy, or she'll never get in your pants. Go buy the log, dope. And you even went so far as to hypnotize the girl to lull me into a false sense of security. You Uchiha are nothing if not thorough, of course. But you made just one mistake. Oh? The cloud cleared, and Naruto tore out of the thick red fog like a man possessed, latching his clawed fingers around Sasuke's throat with a crazed grin. You see, I missed the welcoming ceremony. Is that all? Sasuke asked, rolling his eyes before focusing them upon the hand gripping his neck. In a moment the callous digits had erupted in black flames, and Naruto tore his hand away from the Uchiha, focusing his gaze upon the burning limb, where, to Sasuke's surprise, the flames were simply pushed away by some unknown force. Still, he took advantage of the momentary lapse of concentration on the blonde's part and lashed out with a fist at his face that collided with his cheek with bone-crushing force. The blonde flew back a few feet before he dug his claws into the soft ground and righted himself, throwing himself at the raven-haired avenger with a bestial roar. Sasuke's kusanagi glinted in the sunlight as he drew it from its sheath and blocked Naruto's incoming claws in a shower of sparks. You're trying harder than usual. Could it be you've finally found a real reason to fight rather than that pathetic dream of yours? I'm not gonna let you ruin this life too. Red chakra erupted at the blonde's clawed fingertips and cut cleanly through the Chikudo's blade, reducing it to little more than a steaming puddle of molten metal as Sasuke leapt away, discarding the useless hilt of the sword with a scowl. He shouldn't have been able to do that. While it's not as powerful as Orochimaru's was, it's still a sword of kusanagi. What kind of power does that dope possess now that he can turn a legendary sword such as this into slag? Oh, Miser sighed cutely as she stretched out her thin arms, wandering aimlessly through the decaying forest that covered much of the academy's campus without a care in the world. At Naruto's behest, she'd spent much of the morning honing her skills in creating and controlling eyes, so that if any threat were to rear its ugly head, she could quite easily defend herself. She put a finger to her bottom lip, laden with yet another sugary lollipop, in thought. She wondered, with a pale blush, just where Naruto might be at this moment. Would he be happy to see her? Classes would have finished by now, so the number of places that he could have gotten to was almost infinite. This is ridiculous. I don't get why he should go out there and have all the fun while we're stuck hiding out in a forest. This place gives me the creeps. Miser's stride slowed drastically, and she cupped a hand around her ear to listen. Had she heard right? A group of people, hiding in the woods. From the speaker's words, they didn't seem to be students, or anyone affiliated with the school for that matter, so Miser stepped closer, being sure to keep silent and invisible in the gloom. Your wants and needs don't matter right now, Sujetsu. Sasuke told us to stay put, so that's what we'll do. Reaching the edge of the clearing, Miser pressed herself against a twisted tree trunk and watched the group with a single, narrowed violet eye. From her new vantage point, she could quite clearly see that the one who had spoken that time was a large male, his body wrapped in a black cloak adorned with red cloud markings. She noted that this article of clothing was uniform for the other members too. The one in question was a giant, his frame hulking and muscular as he sat leant against a tree that creaked and groaned under his weight. His bright orange hair stood out in the light mist, as did his blood-red eyes that seemed to flicker between a narrowed, sharp look, an enraged murderous glare, and a bright cheerful warmth. Don't give him that crap. He may be an uchiha, but that doesn't mean he gets to call the shots all the time. It's goddamn annoying. This voice was the same one that had spoken first, she realized, her eyes upon the thin form of another male, his deep purple eyes shadowed ever so slightly by his white bangs. He was frowning deeply, his triangular, shark-like teeth bared in a grimace as he crossed his arms over his chest, over the leather strap that held up the quite simply enormous sword upon his back. Would you shut up already? You're not in charge either, in case you hadn't noticed. The shriek tore from the rouged lips of a bespectacled female, her heart-shaped face framed by long locks of crimson that fell smooth and straight on one side, while spiky and unkempt on the other. Disdain for the white-haired teen was apparent in her equally blood-red eyes, but the sword-toting stranger seemed to pay it no mind. And finally, the Yuki-ana's eyes drifted to the fourth and final individual in the clearing, who remained utterly silent. She sat facing away from the group, her knees drawn up to her chest, while her cloak was slung over her shoulder like a blanket. Miser shifted ever so slightly, thankfully remaining undetected as she did so, and her amethyst eyes grew wide with shock as she recognized the girl's face. DCH, screw this. Sasuke's taken too long, and I'm getting antsy waiting around here with you jackasses. I'ma go get myself some fun. Who knows, maybe Blondie's gotten stronger since last time. The girl Miser was watching seemed to flinch at that, and it took a few moments for the words to register in the youkai's mind. They were after Naruto. She couldn't in good conscience allow any of them to attack and possibly injure her Naruto-kun. Not now, not ever. And so, as the silver-haired one known as Sujetsu left the group, drawing the massive thick-bladed zanbatsu from his back, she followed without the slightest sound, the air temperature around her body lowering drastically as she formed her ice claws. A deep, extended groan rumbled within Jin's throat, and even the cool, calm expression he had schooled his features into could not hide his blatant irritation. He swept back his dusky brown hair with a long-fingered hand, his palm brushing against the crimson leather headband wrapped around his forehead, but his narrow eyes never left the girl at his side. He didn't quite know what to make of her, if he was completely honest. He had heard of people who acted differently around certain individuals, but this chick took the cake, presents and balloons. Right now she was exhibiting what he had deemed to be her tsunts inside. As proud and powerful a presence as any he'd seen in a long time, but at the slightest sight of her precious Uzumaki dono, she'd slip right into her derriere side and become a blushing mess of giddy schoolgirl. If he had any say in the matter, he would be far, far away from here right now, but as it stood he was essentially Naruto's bitch, what with the threat of the blonde revealing just what he had done hanging over his head. If Naruto told him to spin around on the spot while clucking like a chicken, then he'd all but grow feathers to satisfy the blonde's request, lest he be confronted with a veritable battalion of ireful females. In this case, the demand was a lot less humiliating. Keep an eye on one Hisakawa Minami when he was otherwise indisposed for whatever reason. It wouldn't be so much of a problem if he could perhaps admire the girl's fabulous figure with a few flashes of his camera, but if he did that he'd find a Rasengan halfway through his skull before he could say lycanthropy. What's that? Jin turned his head ever so slightly to see that Minami had vanished from his side with a speed even a werewolf would be fairly impressed with, her amber eyes wide as she pressed her nose to the window at the corridor's side. He sidled up to her and peered out of the window, mildly interested in whatever it was that had captured her attention, only to hiss in annoyance. Damn him. How on earth did his bothersome cowhide manage to get himself into more and more trouble with each passing day? The werewolf eyed Naruto's opponent, his hand alight with blue-tinged white lightning that filled the air with the sound of 1,000 chirping birds and the thick odor of ozone, and frowned. He wasn't a student, not if his cloud-marked attire had anything to say about it. Naruto didn't seem to be holding back any, either. Did they know each other? We have to help him. He tore himself free of his thoughts in time to pull Minami back by her shoulder, having slid open the window and put a foot on its frame, wholly ready to leap out to her Uzumaki Dono's rescue. Don't be an idiot. If you're there, he can't very well fight at full strength for fear of catching you in the crossfire. Minami looked up at him pleadingly, and he could see tears beginning to well up in her glittering amber eyes. He hissed and turned away, but Minami wouldn't let it go that easily. Would you rather we do nothing, then? That person he's fighting, I know who he is, and Uzumaki Dono is in really real danger. That man has both the ability and the drive to take on the whole world and win. Jin scoffed, but his features softened slightly. He wanted so much to forget about the blonde and let him get his ass kicked, spiriting this chocolate-skinned beauty away with him, but a part of his conscience reprimanded him for such selfish thoughts. The same part that thought of Naruto as a junior, someone who looked up to him as a superior even if he was stronger. If he let him get himself hurt, or worse, killed, he'd never live down the guilt. The lycanthrope sophomore sighed in defeat before grinning fiercely at his charge. If we're gonna do anything, we'd best get to ground level first, eh? Minami smiled a bright warm smile in response, and with Jin at her side hurried along the corridor, turning many heads at the sight of their haste. And still, Jin's frown returned as they ran. Something bothered him about the young man he'd seen in battle with his blonde cowhide. He reminded him of someone somehow. Perhaps it was those eyes. Those blood-chilling eyes that looked so damn familiar. Sai smiled as he inhaled a long draft of sweet oxygen, soaring high above Youkai Academy on the back of a hawk he'd formed from his Chaoju Giga. He'd soon found that life outside of his shinobi career was quite enjoyable and that he liked the peace that being a normal high school student had granted him. He also liked the sky, and he would make a note to tell Shikamaru that watching the clouds pass was far more relaxing when viewing them from close up. The wind tousled his short raven black hair as he floated in the great unbroken azure sky, and he leant back to enjoy the soft breeze and warm sun on his face. Do you think we should go after him? Sasuke won't be pleased if Suigetsu interferes too much. But of course, years of shinobi training had robbed him of the ability to simply let the world move on without him, and he couldn't help but listen into the conversation below him, within the silence of Youkai Academy's forests. He knew those names all too well, names he'd rather forget. He preferred life out here, where he had friends who weren't suspicious of his every move, and he wasn't thrown into a battle for the sake of the ninja world before he got a chance to rest. Why did people like them have to butt in on that? You'd rather bring Sasuke's anger on yourself. Suigetsu may be strong, but he's an idiot, and Sasuke will punish him in whatever way he sees fit. We'd best steer clear of him for now. The eyes of the remaining three turned away as a pained scream pervaded the silence of the woods, and they leapt to their feet as they prepared for battle. That was Suigetsu's voice. We'd better go help him. I won't allow that, Sai muttered to himself, whipping out his calligraphy brush and sweeping it across the scroll's surface, before bringing his index and middle fingers before him in a one-handed seal. Ninpu. Chaoju Giga. In response, 4 birds about the size of crows sprung into existence at his sides, each laden with a streamer formed entirely of paper explosive tags. A small smirk came to his pale face as he ordered the birds forward, and each one crashed into the ground at the edges of the clearing, cutting off the three's escape. And finally, Sai's own bird dive bombed toward the ground into the cloud of smoke, drawing his tanto. You're not supposed to be here. I don't have time for your games, he heard a voice growl quietly, and he flinched as a loud bestial roar filled the air. I have to kill someone. Sai saw Jugo's enormous frame charge out of the dust cloud and in the direction of the scream, howling in maniacal glee as he rampaged, tearing down anything in his path. Sai turned back to the remaining 2 opponents, only to find a leather-bound fist in his face. The punch slammed into his nose with the force of a runaway freight train, and he found himself thrown clear across the area and through several trees, before finally coming to a halt. Slowly, and with much groaning, he pulled himself to his feet while clutching his bleeding nose, and his eyes widened in shock and surprise as he sighted the person who had hit him. Sa! Ah! Suigetsu howled, clutching at his left arm, while his Kubikiraboucho lay stabbed into the ground at his side, his dark purple eyes narrow as he stared down the stoic Yukiana with a baleful glare. Who the hell do you think you are, bitch? Vizor didn't outwardly react to the Kirinin's words, but she raised her ice claws to the light to inspect them and the crimson stain upon their edge. The long, deadly shards of glittering crystal were dirtied with Sujetsu's blood, having landed a considerable slash on his left bicep in her first attack. Vizor knew that with that one wound the enemy's combat efficiency had been lowered significantly, but she also knew that striking true a second time would not be so easy. The first had only been so easy because she had still had the element of surprise, but now Sujetsu's eyes were on her and only her, and they were looking to kill. Whoever this stranger was, he certainly didn't do things halfway. "Shirayuki Mizor," she stated calmly, blinking slowly. "And you are trespassing here. You must leave, now." Sujetsu gave a crazed grin as he removed his hand from the bloody gash, his fingers soaked in the same red liquid, and gripped his Zanbato's hilt, wrenching it free from the earth. "And you think I'm gonna play by your rules, just like that? You must be ditzier than you look." Mizor's head tilted to the side in confusion, unwittingly confirming the silver-haired shinobi's statement. "I got dragged out here because some hotshot wants to get strong enough to take revenge on his pansy-ass village for something I don't entirely understand, so I'll be damned if I don't get a good fight out of it. Make this worth my while." As the contained dimension that housed Youkai Academy like an eggshell shook violently with the battles that had only just begun, a cold laugh rumbled from behind the swirling mask as the cloaked man watched the events he had planned unfold hundreds of meters below him. His entire body levitated in the air as if he were standing on oxygen itself, and his arms crossed over his chest as his soul Sharingan eye peered out from the depths of his mask. To his right, smoke rose into the sky as the rude Anbu's paper explosives took effect and he began his battle with two of Sasuke's subordinates. In the center a loud cackling laugh permeated throughout the air as the would-be swordsman of the mist took up his blade against a creature known for its cold, merciless heart, perfect for a warrior. Approaching them at an alarming speed, a cloud of dust tore through the forest wantonly as Yuugo rushed into the fray, roaring bestially as he went. And finally, to his left, the fateful showdown between two former best friends, brothers even. He chuckled darkly. "Oh, this was going to be so much fun." So this part ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so quickly like this video for second part of this series. And comment down below your thoughts about this series. And now it's time for me to go, bye.